probably wait maybe one more minute for the Center for Teaching Excellence. I'm here with a couple of my colleagues. I'll let them quickly introduce themselves.
I'm Cortney McEniry. I'm the Artistic Director of UVA-X and also work with the Center for Teaching Excellence.
Dorothe Bach, Associate Director, also at the Center for Teaching Excellence.
I think we have another couple of people lurking too. Lindsay's here, and although Jess is probably a participant, she also helps out at the CTE. Thank you for taking some time this morning. We hope this will be useful for you. We are going to focus on things that may be a little more challenging for you to think about assessment. Some things that you probably already do translate really well to an online environment. Other things might be a bit more challenging. While in the session, we will talk about different technology tools to support your assessment efforts. That's not the focus. The bigger focus is on the pedagogical ideas behind that. But we will allude different tools throughout the session. I'll come back to this at the end. The CTE does have a lot of resources for one-on-one consulting. So if after this session you want a little more help, a little more one-on-one guidance, you can visit our site and sign up for those shorter 30-minute Zoom meetings. All right, so as you probably saw, we are recording this session. This is just so we can share it more broadly at the end. We thought what we'd do is just start with a couple of examples from our own teaching, just to give you some ideas of how we might think about redoing assessment. I'm going to just spend a couple minutes talking about a course I'm not teaching right now, but if I were, this is what I might be doing. So the course is a 100-person chemistry lab course, which has lots of challenges. Students are conducting labs in a laboratory setting and then writing research reports. A few of the things I would change given this environment. Students, I would still require them to do the pre-lab work, which are a set of questions that they would turn in before the lab. That's to make sure they understand the procedures and things like that. Once they turn that in, I would give them a data set from a previous semester of students that did that lab. And because I have lots of students who have taken the class, I can give out multiple data sets, so they don't have to be perfect data sets. They would use that data to then write up the lab report. To cut down on grading and things like that, I would probably just focus on particular sections of the lab report, not have them do the entire thing. And the other thing I would do is I would move make sure the final exam was a take-home exam, giving them types of questions that they've kind of experienced through the lab the entire semester. Probably, again, giving them a data set and have them write that up. So that's just one example of something I might do. I'm going to turn it over to Dorothe now, who will give you a second example.
So I'm in the fortunate position that I have actually set up what's called a specifications grading thing, but I do specifications grading scheme, but I do think that there is application for anybody who hasn't set it up that way. I'm going to share my screen to just give you a sense of what it is. So in the specifications grading scheme, I have set up different levels of complexity for work over time. Can you see my screen? Nope, not yet. Okay, just try this again. Okay, we need to be out first. So the idea here is that there is a foundation for everything we do in this class. In this case, it's participation and different levels of participation. In order to earn credit, students do attend the class, they write blog posts, and depending on whether they would like a C, B, or an A, they do more of it. And they also, if they want an A, write 5 comments. Everybody is writing a learning plan. So this is for a class called Co-Create UVA, where the goals are, among others, to become a better student and better observer of their own learning habits in light of the science. And so a learning plan is part of it. And there is an end of semester portfolio where students put together samples of their work and comment on it and make meaning of it. As you can see in the A bundle, there is a partnership project, which was students wrote a proposal to present 2 workshops at the Pedagogy Summit, the Innovations in Pedagogy Summit that the CTE puts on every year. And they would have prepared a workshop and given it at the summit. So obviously this is not what we can do in this class. So I'm modifying that option to a blog, a public blog that students are writing about the topics that they have chosen. One of them is the issue of the benefits and drawbacks of faculty and student self-disclosure. So they can still write a blog post to it. What I will strongly recommend to my students, however, is that everybody gives themselves the grace to actually simply choose the class for credit. Given the circumstances at this moment in time, it is not a required course, it's an elective, it doesn't count for pre-med. Nobody needs to add on extra work to their own plate. So I will strongly advocate that we simply proceed with a lower level of effort and give ourselves some time to process what's happening in this current climate. I guess I give it over to Cortney.
Okay, so I'm also not teaching this semester. If I were, my students would be hitting their field work right now. And so they would likely be doing a facilitation assignment where they would be facilitating a workshop in the community or with a community partner, and then revising their workshop plan. Because of the nature of what we're experiencing right now, this would be impossible for any student to do, and it would be impossible for me to assess their success or their growth as facilitators. And so I would just really need to shift my emphasis on the learning goals. So typically students will script out their facilitation, they'll do the actual workshop, and then they'll revise the facilitation afterwards based on their experience in the workshop. And I would shift my emphasis from sort of the reflective, how to reflect on yourself as a facilitator and how to be in the space, in a specific space as a facilitator, to paying more attention to the learning objective of how do you modify facilitation for specific contexts. And so I might ask students to either in writing or via video to explain how they would do the workshop that they had planned for 3 different types of contexts. And so instead of going through the revision process, because they're not going to have the real life experience to inform the revision process, might just ask them to think about how they would do that 3 different places or with 3 different audiences. And in doing so, still assessing really important learning for them as facilitators, but just not trying to assess an objective that is impossible to assess at this point.
So that just gives you an idea of how we might change some of the assessment plans that we have in our courses. We'll give some more ideas, and certainly feel free to add to the ideas as we go along. It's a small group. You'll be able to interact in multiple ways. If you have a question or something you want to add, you can either raise your literal hand, or if you click on participants down at the bottom, you should get access to a little blue icon hand that you can raise. Courtney's going to be monitoring that as well as the chat, so you can add questions to the chat or comments to there. We'll try to repeat those in case the chat is distracting to you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, so those of you that came in late, we had a question here. What challenges are you having reimagining your assessments or assignments? So keep that question in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to it at the end. What we wanted to do is focus on the first question is, what kinds of assessments are you trying to reimagine? we did some brainstorming, and here are a few things that we came up with. If you don't see the thing you're interested in there, go ahead and put that in the chat. One of the common things is rethinking multiple choice tests, closed book exams, quantitative exams. How do you actually go about having those kinds of assessments? Group projects, how do you manage those group projects? Should you even do it? What types of group projects are possible or not possible? Student presentations or performances. If you're in like a architecture or art discipline, you may have built objects, models or something like that, physical portfolios that you would have to create or figure out a way to, an alternative to. The last one, the dependent writing assignments, that is things like lab reports where students would have to have something to be able to write about, and that something might not be readily available to them. Obviously, if they're reading something and then writing on that becomes a little easier, but if they have to have data or some other source, that becomes a little more difficult. So those are just a few of the things that are a little more challenging. Again, if something that you're thinking about doesn't fit in that list, type it in the chat. We're interested in learning. Regardless, there are some questions you should consider when thinking about your assessments. The first is, what matters most? In this time where we have to make decisions because we're teaching our course in a modality in which it was never designed, we have to really strip everything down to its core and figure out what's important. In terms of a learning environment, that means reflecting back on your learning objectives, figuring out which of those are most important. And even for the most important one, which aspects of the learning objective are most important. Think about what it is you really want your students to know, to be able to do, or value at the end of the course. And then think about what are those other things that you might be able to shed. Second question, what is the simplest way students might demonstrate their learning? And so often our assessments or assignments are fairly complex and they get at multiple dimensions of learning, but there might be, given the situation, some simpler ways for them to demonstrate that. So for example, if you have a group project and it's assessing certain kinds of objectives, maybe there's ways to break that group project down so students are only doing pieces of it. So remember in my laboratory example, I'm going to give them data. The fact that they're not actually in the lab doing stuff is less important to me, so I'm going to give them data. And also, I want them to write about what they learn. And for each student, that might be something else. So I might target what it is that student focuses on. Maybe they've already demonstrated mastery in one thing, and so I can simplify that for them. Second is, what is the simplest way for you to provide feedback? We assign things and that's good for the students, but the real value comes in the feedback. So what are simpler ways for you to provide that feedback? It's a misconception that when we move to an online environment, the technology tools make assessment easier. In fact, in some cases, they can make it a lot harder. Imagine trying to give feedback on a quantitative problem set through a remote tool, where students are solving problems, maybe they're uploading their solutions by hand or something like that. It becomes really difficult. So you might think about ways to provide group feedback. You might provide ways to video record feedback or audio record feedback, have students peer or self-assess. So there's a lot of ways they can get feedback. Just knowing that it's probably not ideal, and so you might just, in the end, make some sacrifices. Last question, which we all feel is pretty important, is in what ways are your assessments maybe not equitable, especially given the situation? What are you asking students that might make it hard in some cases? For example, if students don't have readily available access to the technology or to the internet or to certain sort of materials or resources. Keeping in mind that students may be in different parts of the world, different time zones. They may have health, financial issues that they're dealing with. They may have sick or loved ones. Remember also that our students have been used to living away from home for a while. Those that are fortunate to be at home are having to adjust to that particular lifestyle. And almost everything we're asking them to do is some form of writing. And so how might you mix that up so that they have other opportunities so that we're not disadvantaging some students? Courtney, Dorothy, do you have anything to add to any of those questions?
One thing to maybe say also, so simplifying is one way of thinking. It's also really adjusting to this particular context. So sometimes it is the context that you can bring into the assessment, right? It could be more reflective, or it could be sensitive to the fact that for some people, the connection right now is important. So if you have kind of check-in, if you could do some check-in groups for those who are interested in the social connection. I have this in my class where I was thinking, oh, I need to jettison all of my group projects, too complicated, but making optional ways for students to connect and also connect it to a learning goal that you have might not seem simple, but it's actually socially really beneficial for students. So one other point I want to add is figuring out where students are at and kind of getting the pulse of the situation and offering options. I think this is a great way to experiment with options.
I think that's a good point. Simple doesn't mean abandoning things you've done in the past. Group projects can be actually an excellent thing to do even in a remote environment. Students typically work remotely with each other anyway. My sense is that they don't often get together face-to-face for group projects, at least not all the time. So it can provide an opportunity for them to connect to their classmates and have meaningful experiences in smaller groups. So, it can be managed pretty easily online, even if you do in the end decide to scale back just a little bit. So before we jump into specific things, we also want to give you the opportunity to give yourself permission to do certain things. Not that you have to do these things, but here are some ideas of what you could do given the situation. You could shift the priority or emphasis of your learning objectives, right? That goes back to that idea of what matters most. So you may just have a conversation with students and be transparent about it and say, this is where we're going to put our energy and focus here. You may want to rescale assignments or projects. Maybe they're not as ambitious. Maybe instead of that podcast project you were going to do, maybe it's just they develop the script and give peer feedback on that script. Rather than a digital media project, maybe they create a storyboard for it instead. Maybe you end up dropping some assignments. This may be contrary to some of the information you're getting from your schools or departments, so just be careful that you're aware of what they're asking of you. But again, given the situation, it might make sense to drop some of those lower priority assignments. Think about breaking up or spreading out summative assessments. That might be those large kind of end of unit exams. Maybe instead of doing those, you have smaller daily or weekly quizzes. Maybe you add a little bit more homework. So maybe there's ways to cut those back or break them up so that both it's not so high risk and high stress for students, but it also makes it easier for you to provide feedback. Already talked about this a little bit, but provide alternatives for feedback. Remember, you're not the only one that can provide this, so utilize, have students utilize their peers, self-feedback, and other opportunities. You could alter your grading scheme, particularly in the situation that we're in, where you move, since credit, no credit will be an option to students. Maybe there's, you can set bars and say, if you reach these bars, you'll earn a certain grade. I would be careful not to change it too much. Try to stick as closely as you can to the original plan. If you do change some things, just be super transparent about that and get feedback from students about the impacts. Sometimes we think a change is good, and in fact, sometimes it actually has a negative consequence that we didn't recognize. So asking students can be helpful to see if that actually would be beneficial to them. Dorothy, Courtney, anything you want to add here? No.
I would just say, unless, excuse me, and mid-sneeze, unless writing is an objective for the course, considering offering options for other modalities for their contribution, like video or audio. Students right now are being asked to put a lot of their thoughts into writing, and it's not like, for example, for a performance course, if I asked my students, because we're not going to be able to be together every day, to instead write down what they did for their daily warm-up, that is putting a lot of extra work, especially on students whose strength might not be in writing. And my course is not about them knowing how to write and record their daily warm-up or reflect on what they need as actors next. And so if I could give them the option of writing or doing a 1-minute video check-in every day, that could create more of an equitable opportunity for students, and also just ease the burden a little bit of all the writing that folks are being asked to do because the learning environment has shifted virtually.
And that's really just good advice in general, even outside of the current situation. Having students tap into different types of learning is always good. So photographs, videos, poetry, drawings, all sorts of things that they could be doing, which can help them learn in different ways. Let me pause also. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second and just see if there are questions, comments from the group here. We have a little bit of time.
I have a question. A few of my students have been asking about like how the credit or no credit grades will affect their med school applications and grad school applications. Do you guys know anything about that?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then Dorothy and Courtney might add to it. There's lots of conversation, not just at UVA, but everywhere. I think the important thing to remember is this is not a localized situation. This is a world-wide situation. Every student, or most students, are going to have this asterisk on their transcripts, right? And so while I can't say anything about how individual schools or individual programs would view those, I would be surprised if they viewed them, if they took those into consideration, right? They're going to be looking more at post and pre-grades, post-grades, letters, things like that. One thing that struck me is the first institution in the US to go to this pass-fail during the situation was MIT. And I just have a hard time imagining that graduate schools and medical schools are not going to let MIT students in because they have an asterisk or a pass-fail grade on their transcript in spring 2020. Dorothy, you want to add anything to that?
Just to say that this is also a good moment to remind students that this is a global phenomenon, and this is not restricted, and that most schools are actually going to a pass-fail option without the option for a grade. So what I hinted at before, I would want to communicate very clearly and very strongly that this is also about recognizing the scope and the scale of a medical crisis, and particular medical students can think about self-care in this moment, or being active in the community in particular ways that might signal engagement in a public health crisis. So I would really broaden the horizon from worrying about your personal grade in a semester where most institutions only have the option for pass-fail.
Just to kind of sum that up, I think we're looking for traditional solutions to a situation that has nothing that we're familiar with, and so I think we just have to be open to the possibility that that the solutions are going to be different because of the situation. Any other questions before we dive into specific assessment challenges? All right, I'm going to share back here. We're going to ask you just to take a second and help us see what's on your mind. It's a small group. We'll see how this goes. If it doesn't go well, then we'll tackle it a different way. But we're going to ask you to use Slido, slido.com. So if you use your web browser, whether that's on the computer you're Zooming from or a different one, just go to slido.com. It'll ask you for a meeting ID. That meeting ID is 53948. Once you get in there, you'll see the same question, the question we started the session with: what challenges are you having reimagining your assessment assignments? If you'll go ahead and type your response there, as responses start to pop up, you'll be able to upvote them with a little thumbs up. You can upvote as many different questions as you like, or topics as you like. You just can't add multiple votes for a single question. And this is the participant interaction piece. We need your help, so. There we are, we have a question. So we'll get a few more up there. I'm just gonna mute myself and we'll just let them come up a little bit. Again, watch those and then upvote the ones that you want us to spend the most time on, or at least start with. All right, I think we'll abandon Slido as a tool. We have a smaller group than I thought, and maybe not a lot of questions. There's another question there. So maybe we'll just start to tackle some of these. You should be able to, I think, Dorothy, do people have permission to unmute themselves? Yeah, so you do have the ability to unmute yourself. So the first question, what's the most effective assessment style for traditional online learning courses? Could you provide just a little more context about what you mean on this question? Whoever had that.
That was me. So I was thinking more about like courses that are designed to be online, like what assessment styles tend to work well in those situations. And like what can we learn from normal online courses?
Yeah, ones that were actually designed to be online. That's a good question. It turns out all the things that you would do in a traditional face-to-face class can be done in an online environment. Often thinking about shorter formative types of things. So maybe a small little, depending on how often the class meets, maybe weekly quizzes. There might be a blog or a discussion post that students are responding to. Probably often a group project component where students are developing stuff maybe through Google Docs or some other sort of Google tool, collaborative tool. But they're probably also doing some more traditional things. They might actually have tests. They might be submitting essays and papers. The difference is thinking about carefully about what kind of content that they have to support those assessments. What kind of resources do they need access to? Would they have all of those things? And then the other thing is to think about timing, right? So what things are you doing to prepare for maybe your in-class asynchronous sessions versus what could they be doing outside of class in an asynchronous way? Dorothy, Courtney, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, you know, I think the tendency is to think that there is a lot of difference, and that you are, when you teach online, there's a completely, there's one way of doing online and there's one way of doing face-to-face. It is about the adaptation. It's about thinking creatively and in both modalities. It's just that we haven't set it up that way.
The one advantage is if some of these tools allow for instantaneous feedback. So if you're using some sort of quizzing tool that has quantitative data, then you can get instantaneous feedback, or there's multiple choice. You can also set up a lot of the student response systems. The clicker systems have ways to deliver clicker questions asynchronously, and those give instantaneous feedback to students. So that could be one advantage to the remote environment. But mostly everything stays the same. Just keep in mind that students don't have as available access to office hours to you as an instructor probably. So you just need to consider those things. This first one, maybe Dorothy and Courtney can help me out. For summer class and planning, we have a community engagement, community assessment focus, which will be difficult. How do we simulate that experience?
Can whoever submitted that question tell us a little bit more about your class?
Sure. Hi, this is Kathryn Elmore. I'm a PhD candidate in the School of Nursing here at UVA, and I'll be working with a community health course in the summer, which typically involves the students going out and actually doing what we kind of call like clinical hours. But really, it's about community needs assessment and developing a kind of a simulated project for how they might work on addressing that need. So I'm just trying to begin brainstorming now about how we're going to have to shift that to completely online. I don't think they'll be able to go into the community to even see the community, much less talk to people about community needs.
I think my first suggestion would be for students to focus on the community that they are most familiar with, and to shift the assignment to be whatever community that they would identify as being a part of and that they already have a lot of that knowledge around, rather than it having to be like the Charlottesville community. So they can sort of mine their own lived experience to develop some of that content. My other suggestion, or my other thought, would be, we are in a very particular time where a lot's being written about public health, as you know, and so I wonder if there's a way for students to apply those skills in a way that might still be useful, even if it was just for their immediate family. Like, could they create a plan for their people that they live with, the household that they live in? Could they host a Facebook or an Instagram live FAQ for, I think going back to what are those objectives, and can they make them more hyper-localized and hyper-personalized, so that they're still thinking about specific communities, specific contexts, but they're not having to develop new understanding of communities. Rather, they're building on their own intimate knowledge of their personal communities.
So I had the opposite thought from Courtney, because after all, right, this is the challenge in an environment where there's a virus that prevents us from going in the community. So figuring out what are alternative ways of doing needs assessment in a virtual world to prepare for scenarios in the future that might be similar. What might be data out there already that could be mined in creative ways? Can we actually compare and contrast what's happening in our community, what's happening in other communities across the world. So I can see a whole course around the coronavirus situation and trying to understand community responses across the world in the local contexts. So, you know, different groups of students being responsible for comparing yet another part of the world and the community and reporting back in various ways. So I think both are really great. I mean, both are two ways. There are two ways of thinking about this and many more.
That's helpful. Thank you both.
Yeah, I like both of those responses because it shows the range of possibilities, right? I think sometimes we feel stuck, but for me, this is an opportunity to think creatively and really think about what is really the essential part of what students are doing. And obviously, you've thought about that in the past, and you recognize the power of getting in the community, but there are pieces of that you really want them to take away. And so, how can you replicate that? Question, I'm guessing this was from Su Chen. For a language class, I had made written work grades on a completion basis and focus on evaluating students' oral competence. Are you having a problem with that? What's not working? Can you unmute for us? I can unmute you. There you go.
Yeah, actually, I feel it's working, but I just want to confirm or verify with another language teacher or expert.
Yeah, well, my only expertise is in English, so we'll let Dorothy handle that one as you suggested.
So tell us a little bit about what you have thought. I suspect that you have come up with a wonderful solution already that might be worth sharing.
So I am making the written work, including written tests, to be on a completion basis, whereby so long as they understand and use my feedback and the feedback is reflected in their revision, that's good enough for me. I'm willing to give them a completion grade. But then, of course, if they still miss something, then I take off very few points. So I'm now focusing on the one-on-one oral test that I will do to be sure that they can speak spontaneously and interact with me in a meaningful way. That's all I am focusing on now. So I am letting go on, because you know, in the past when we were doing classroom dictation quiz, I've seen students who cheated. So I told them no need to worry about things like that. So I just want to see your improvements, that you actually learn something. That's what matters, rather than, you know, showing me perfect work, which is not. Which for some students may be hard because they may not have enough time to learn the characters. So I think what I'm doing seems reasonable and manageable for them. They taking out the stress of having to earn that good dictation quiz daily to get a better final grade at the end. So I took that whole stress out of their life.
So yeah, I like this, and particularly because you're making use of the fact that you can do lots of one-on-one work with your students right now. You know, maybe in better ways than you were previously planning. So another wonderful example of creative adaptation to it. And I'm actually curious whether there's more wisdom in the room that we haven't heard. I'm just curious, we're all learning, so you have thought probably already pretty hard about changes. This is now week, where are we? Week 3 of the online teaching. So I'm inviting everybody to just share where their thinking is, and maybe we can help make some tweaks.
Actually, maybe this is a question about during breakout rooms when we can only join one room at a time. So we don't really know what the other groups are doing, right? So I feel it's another moment of letting go again, right? Let go of wanting them to be all behave in a certain way, since we cannot be in all breakout rooms. And then when I'm in the breakout room, I ended up being the discussion leader, I found. I wonder if anybody could suggest something so that I could be mostly listening rather than leading the discussion.
Well, it's the same tendencies that we have in face-to-face teaching, right? We can't be in all the breakouts simultaneously. And the tendency is for people to look at us. So maybe it's even easier to just mute yourself, just have it very clear to your students that you're just there to listen and that you'll mute yourself on any conversation. And this adds the additional barrier that you would have to manually unmute yourself to be speaking. So I actually think it has advantages. It worked for me, at least. I did the same thing in last class, and I told myself I'm just be on mute and told everybody.
Great.
So
yeah.
Sorry, I was gonna say you could also turn off your video so they can't see your facial expressions too.
Great.
You could just make it a habit of not saying anything in those meetings, in those breakouts. Go from breakout to breakout, and then when you're done, pull them all back together, and then give kind of global feedback. That might be another way to do it. Or again, just reserve that feedback to the last 30 seconds before you leave the room, and give them the next thing to practice on.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't mute ourselves or our video when it's face-to-face. So this is an advantage. The technology can make us be quiet. A couple other folks on the line that we haven't heard questions from. Maybe you're getting your questions answered. Maybe you've had good successes. Any other comments to share? We don't want to belabor this if we've met your needs, but you got 3 people here who are willing to answer your questions.
So maybe you want to use the chat also as a way to just drop a question.
Just gonna share a couple resources for you. Courtney will paste these into the chat window. Just some really good articles produced at other institutions. First one comes from Harvard, their Center for Teaching and Learning, similar to CTE. Really good suggestions in there. And then one that's coming out of Rutgers, although I think their work is crowdsourced, so it's pulling from lots of different places, but just some advice for more quantitative types of disciplines. Although there's other ideas in there as well, and links to other information. When the session's ended, the chat's going to go away, so make sure you copy those or bookmark them if you want to read them. If you have lingering questions or you think of some things later down the road, the best place to get help on UVA resources is through teachingcontinuity.virginia.edu. There's a great set of links on different types of teaching practices and suggestions on tools that you might use. We showed Slido as one tool. There's another tool called Mentimeter that does some, it's a free tool, so just like Slido. It allows you to give feedback from students in some unique ways. Remember, within UVA CoLab, there's a whole host of tools. And on that teaching continuity page, it'll tell you what tool is useful for what situation. There's also a link on that page to getting help. In addition to the CTE there, all the school contacts are listed. For the CTE, from that page, you can sign up for a one-on-one 30-minute consultation through, if you're in the college, Learning Design and Technology also has one-on-one consultations, as well as a number of other schools. If you haven't discovered the help in Colab on some of these tools, it's really outstanding. And this is the direct link to the help in UVA Colab. So colab.its.virginia.edu/portal/help. That will take you directly to their help. Lots of screenshots, lots of detail on how to make the tools work, from Zoom to forums to all the other tools within UVA Colab. Stop one more time and entertain questions. If we don't get any, we'll probably sign off. All right, that looks like a wrap. Thank you all and good luck. Don't forget to care for yourself. We spend a lot of time and energy caring for our students. Be sure you're taking time for yourself and doing whatever you can to stay healthy and safe. Take care, and we'll talk and see you soon.